Hello, I'm Dave Crossland, and I'm the Program Manager Typography Specialist for Google Fonts. And I'm very happy to be sponsoring the Typo Day on behalf of Google this year. And I have a small presentation about the latest technology development in typography, which is the new variable fonts technology. And variable fonts is very exciting because it adds a new dynamism to typography. And so this simple video shows you the weight and the width of the skier typeface being varied as an animation. And this is also working not just for animation, but for typography. So this is an example of the Chrome browser, and you can see this slider allows me to adjust the weight and the width of the typeface dynamically on the web page. And this technology was unveiled at the recent A-Type-I conference in Poland. And on the A-Type-I YouTube channel, there is the video, the special OpenType session, which I think is running for nearly an hour and a half, that goes into detail about how it works. And for me, I was very satisfied to see this development. On a recent Monotype blog article, the history of this technology was discussed. And when I was a student around 15 years ago, there was a similar kind of technology called multiple master technology developed from Adobe. And it allowed families of fonts to be varied with the fonts drawn in the corners and then filled in, as this illustration from the Monotype blog shows. And this technology was, in a way, a kind of back to the future kind of technology. In the past, typefaces had different designs for use at different sizes. And this is an example of the typeface Century. And so you can see on the left the 72-point intended design, and on the far right, the design intended for 4 points. So the variable fonts technology allows you to have a typeface that has these kinds of variations. And the Adobe Multiple Master technology was kind of taken out of circulation. When I was a student, there were still multiple master fonts that you could license, and multiple master features in programs like Adobe Illustrator. But as I was studying, those features and those fonts were discontinued. So I was very happy to see this kind of technology return. The OpenType variable fonts format is based on the Apple TrueType GX format, and that has a different basis. Instead of having fonts in the corners of the design space, you start with the regular design, and then you have deltas from that design to change the design in various directions. Again, this illustration from the Monotype blog. And this creates the possibility for very complex design spaces. This illustration is from the John Hudson Introduction to OpenType Variable Fonts that was published at the time of the A-Type-I announcement. and it shows a multi-dimensional space. It's kind of difficult for me to get my head around. So with this technology arriving, I was very happy to connect with David Burlow at the Font Bureau and now Type Network. And I commissioned from him 2 typefaces. The first typeface is Decovar. This typeface has broken down the Latin alphabet into very much the components of the letter forms. So here you see a somewhat familiar alphabet where all of the components are in a straight way. And dragging the slider over the top, you can see those letter parts being varied to make a very decorative set of letter forms. And down here on the page, you can see that there are 4 kinds of skeletons that you can select. A regular skeleton, a outline skeleton, this kind of bent skeleton, and a dashed skeleton. And then along the bottom, there are different kinds of terminals, rounded ends, serifed ends, different kinds of serifs, cuts, horns, no terminals at all, slab serifs, and so on. And so these can be put together in various combinations to create different decorated letter forms. And the amount that they vary from the norm can also be adjusted with these sliders. The second typeface, which I commissioned, was a serif text face. And this starts to show the way in which type design can be done in a different way that is designing with variations in mind from the start. So the typeface starts with 4 different kinds of axes variation. Axis number 1 and number 3 are kind of a pair. You see axis 1, only the sides of the letter form are changing in their width. And in number 3, only the contrast at the tops of the letters and the bottom is changing. And then in illustrations 2 and 3, again a pair, you see that the stroke width remains the same, but the width of the letter is varying. And in number 4, you see that only the height is varying. Those kind of parametric weight and width axes can be multiplied, and with a few other axes, they allow a kind of blended axis to be developed. So here again is the Axis Praxis website, and we can install a set of web fonts, variable web fonts, into the page here, and then select Amstelvar. And so you can see that we have the para width and para weight axis that are only adjusting these single kind of isolated variables. And then the optical size axis is going to vary several of those parametric axes at the same time. So as we move it towards a very large display style, you see that the contrast is reduced, the width is reduced. And as we go down to the very smallest optical size, you can see there that the X height increases slightly. So this combination of parameters produces optical axis. And that method of blending can also be used to create grades, where the weight changes, but the metrics of the letters do not. And the full details of this approach are explained in Type Network's announcement. The Axis Praxis website allows you to play around with various different web fonts with the variable font technology. But if you try it out, you may find that your web browser does not yet support this technology. You need to get the bleeding edge versions of browsers for this to work. For Chrome, that's known as Google Chrome Canary. And when you download Chrome Canary, you have to go to an experimental flags page and enable the experimental web platform features for this to work. Similarly, for Firefox, you can download the Firefox nightly build, and there are also some settings that you must enable for variable fonts to work. For type designers, there's a font make toolset which can generate these variable fonts, and it can use sources in the glyphs format or the UFO format. And a recently announced UFO font editor is TrueFont that can be used with FontMake to make variable fonts. To keep track of the latest developments of this new technology, there are 2 Twitter accounts which I can recommend. The first is the Variable Fonts account by Nick Sherman, and the second is the Axis Praxis Twitter account by Lawrence Penny. These are updated weekly with all the latest developments, and so I encourage you to follow them. Finally, if you wanted to contact me to discuss any of this, you can tweet to @GoogleFonts. Thank you.